This thing on. Um, hey, thanks for being here this morning. We'll kind of carve out a little quiet space in between the awesome displays of military might. It's like a weird Oreo or something. Um, the the quiet space is the cream filled. I don't know, just bad. Just off to a strong start here this morning. Um, Thank you. All right, just a couple of quick announcements, and then we'll take a moment just to say hi to each other, and then we'll get into the teaching for this morning. Announcements being, it's a reminder that this whole operation, this community, is funded entirely by just us, just our donations, and so. For October, the way that we've been framing up the asking request is $22 per adult per week would close this little deficit gap we've been running for a while, and we'd be fully funded. And so that is kind of the request. And also here's just an expression of gratitude to God and to all of us for the amazing, extreme generosity that is already present here in this room. So thank you. And second announcement is next week. So there's 5 Sundays in October. And historically, what we've done, that doesn't happen all the time. How many Sundays are there usually in October, or, as far as 4 in a month? So whenever there is a 5-Sunday month, we've always done something a little bit different, and we have been doing like a work day, like cleaning up the theater. And so the staff had gotten together a couple months ago, and we're planning out the work day. Somebody had the idea, like, let's just throw a party instead. That sounded good to everyone. So next week, we're going to have the first ever fall festival, Beaches Vineyard, and I think we've got a slide for that, I hope. And here's how it's going to work. So Christopher Sprinkle, primarily Christopher Sprinkle, this beautiful man, lion's mane for hair, has been diligently working to update our patio and make the patio the kind of place where, like, we could open the doors and let our kids run around without assuming that one of them is probably going to get run over by somebody. It's crazy how fast you can get a vehicle going in a short amount of space. Like between 2 speed bumps, you can somehow hit 60. I don't know how. Yeah, it's amazing. So we're trying to cut down on some of the feeling of dread and anxiety that most parents have when they're hanging out on the patio. And also, I actually remember this decision. Like 15 years ago, the patio was redone, and we put out those pavers that used to just be parking lot all the way up to the building. So put those pavers down, and there was, we had all kinds of important meetings about what color to get, paver patio color and all this stuff. And so we selected what we did, and then they installed it. And then the first time any of us walked out of church on a Sunday, like the sunlight hits that white tile. I don't know if it's blinding for sure. You kind of come out like, ah. So anyway, it's like it's beautiful out there, but it's also like a sun-scorched wasteland. And so we're working to get some shade and close it in and make it an inhabitable place, especially as the weather's cooling down. So, so we want to have that mostly done-ish by next Sunday for this fall festival. That's our goal. And so we're going to have like circus games out there, and we'll have like an open grill afterwards. So it's sort of like, you come hang out and then go run across to wherever you like to get food and bring something back to grill. The Jags game will be on at 1. And then in here, we're going to see this table over here? My lovely wife, Jess, has put this together. And this is going to be like you ever heard of All Saints Day? I didn't grow up Catholic. I'd never heard of it and had very little exposure to that tradition until, strangely, my kids' school that meets in the forest at Hannah Park, they celebrate this every year. And we went to it last year, and I was really moved by the presentation. The way the school did it is they just set up this little like shrine basically in the forest, all these flags, and invited folks to bring a picture of a passed on loved one, and so the whole table and backdrop was just surrounded, covered in pictures of people that are loved and missed and cherished, and still in a lot of ways experienced by those of us who are still here. And so we decided we'd do something similar to that. And so this is your invitation between now and November 1st to just bring in a picture of someone that you love that's passed. Corey actually asked if they had to be related to you or if you could bring in a picture of, who was it? Who did you want to bring in a picture of? Where'd he go? Chuck Norris or something ridiculous like that. But that's not how it works. Oh, I don't think. I think the. Yeah, I was going to say, I'm pretty sure the jokes would reveal he cannot die. So that was a bad example. Yeah, right. Yeah, I hope he's not. Sorry, Chuck, if you're listening. Yeah, so I printed out these little cards to remind us to bring a picture in. And it's got a little poem I like by Billy Collins. And I'll put it right. Oh, yeah, actually. Yeah, so if anybody wants that, you can raise your hand. And while that's happening, you can just mix it up, hang out with each other. And I'll call us back together in just a couple minutes for the teaching. Oh, there I am. Yeah, so if everybody could just start making your way back towards your seats there. All right. So this morning, you can put up the title slide. This morning's parable, this is actually our 19th parable that we've looked at in this series, Parabola. And this is the parable of the talents. It's a pretty famous one. I'm not sure how it made it all the way down to 19 in our order, but it's the parable of the talents. And so we're going to take a look at that this morning. And but before we do, I'm just going to invite myself and all of us to take just a moment to just kind of settle into your seat, settle into where you are. And if it's helpful to collect yourself, just take a few deep breaths. And maybe take just a moment to check in on your body, and if there are any messages that your body is trying to communicate to you, just pay attention to how it feels to be seated where you are, as you are. Take a moment to check in on your mind, on your thoughts. And just pay attention or look to see if you consider this morning, or maybe even this past week, what would you say your primary preoccupation has been? What Is there a place that your thoughts keep returning you to? Just see if there is, and see if it is clear enough to name and to know. And take just a second to check in on your emotional state. How is it that you're feeling? How have you been feeling? What's been your primary emotional experience? Today, this morning, this week. And maybe check in also on your desire set. And maybe particularly if you were to answer the question, what is it that you're doing here? Kind of all the places you could be this morning. Here we are. We all ended up here. And it's for a variety of reasons and also for one reason. And I just wonder if you're in touch with what your specific desire is. What do you hope happens this morning? What are you here for? Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, we release, extend, acknowledge any and all of these recognitions to you, and we ask that you would hold them for us, and that you would allow us the grace to be settled in where we are, truly present in this place, aware of your presence within and around us. Find that we've been simplified or reduced enough. That we're resting in this place that Jesus, you called the kingdom, where the words and ideas, the ones that are true, are shared, and they're also heard and received from the same place. Where we are one as you are one. And it's in your name that we pray. Amen. All right, let's just get into this thing here, okay? Because there's all kinds of stuff to talk about, I think. I've thoroughly enjoyed my time with this story the last few weeks. It's okay, you know how a minute ago I said that I don't know how it got pushed down to number 19? I do know how it got pushed down to number 19 and why I'm just talking about it right now. It's because it ends in a way that, it's got one of these things at the end of it, like where Jesus says something that I just would rather not have to say also. And looking at it and trying to figure out how to interpret that and communicate that to a group of people, I was like, I'm not touching that with a 10-foot pole. Just remembered that. That's why we're just talking about it now. So I'd like to say I've grown a lot over the last 19 parables and 26 years or however long it's been that we've been in this series. So here we go. Jesus says this. He says, it's as if a man who, going on a journey, summoned his slaves, and he entrusted his property to them. To one he gave 5 talents, to another 2, to another 1, each according to his ability. And then he went away. The one who had received the 5 talents went off at once, and he traded with them, and he made 5 more talents. In the same way, the one who had the 2 talents made 2 more talents. But the one who had received the 1 talent went off and dug a hole in the ground, and he hid his master's money. After a long time, the master of those slaves came, and he settled accounts with them. Then the one who had received the 5 talents came forward. He brought 5 more talents, and he said, Master, you handed over to me 5 talents. Look what I did. I've made 5 more. And his master said to him, Well done, good and trustworthy slave. You have been trustworthy in a few things, so now I will put you in charge of many things. Enter into the joy of your master. And the one with the 2 talents also came forward, and he said, Master, you handed over to me 2 talents. See, I've made 2 more. His master said to him, Well done, good and trustworthy slave. You've been trustworthy in a few things, so now I will put you in charge of many things. Enter into the joy of your master. Then the one who had received the 1 talent also came forward, and here's what he said, Master, I knew that you were a harsh man, or cruel is the word, reaping where you didn't sow and gathering where you hadn't scattered seed. And so I was afraid of you, and I went and I hid your talent in the ground. Here, have what's yours. And so the master replied, You wicked and lazy slave. You knew, did you, that I reap where I did not sow, and that I gather where I did not scatter? Then you ought to have invested my money with the bankers, and on my return I would have received what was my own with interest. Sensible. So take the talent from him and give it to the one with the 10 talents. For to all those who have, more will be given, and they will have an abundance. But from those who have nothing, even what they have will be taken away. As for this worthless slave, throw him into the outer darkness, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. And all God's people said, yikes. Whoa. What's that? How's that hit you? How do you respond to that? Business is business. It's just business, man. It's not personal. Yep. It never feels like business when you're on the receiving end of business or when you're on the giving end of business. None of us believe that statement. I don't think.
It strikes me that he always talks about love and fellowship and the new ways, and now it's like, no, it's back to the vengeful God, cracking the whisk.
Yeah. Yeah, how do we put these two things together? It seems like he's talking about, yeah. I concur.
Is the master supposed to be God? Because that one slave seems to not be real impressed with his character.
Oh, hey. Did you guys catch that? All right, because that's how parables work. That's how stories work. We think in story, that's how we make sense of things in linear time. And the way stories work is through, how we assign, how we connect to the different roles. That's kind of what we're doing subconsciously, unconsciously when we're watching a story or hearing something. We're trying to figure out the symbolism and who's what. And so generally, when we read a parable, the person with power, the master, it's got to be, it's not me, it's got to be God. And all the rest of the characters are like, am I that guy? Am I that guy? Am I all the guys? So Don just asked the question, so the master, is he supposed to be God? And what's the deal with the third slave's opinion of him? And I think that's a critical point here. I think that, as with everything in life, how we interpret both our life events or the events of a story that we've just heard depends entirely on the perspective that we're interpreting through. And that's just the truth of things, is that we're all interpreting. There's no, objective truth is a beautiful ideal. But all of us land on objective truth subjectively. So I don't know what you call that. Subjective truth. And so, we have this little interpreter inside of us, this worldview, paradigm, matrix that information runs through, and it's how we take experiences and convert them into meaning. And so to me, the story hinges, how we understand it, hinges on how we perceive the third slave, the third servant. Is he a reliable narrator? Has he got good information and an accurate read on the situation, or is he an unreliable narrator? Has he misinterpreted the nature of his master? And after spending a couple of weeks with this parable, I'm convinced that the most common interpretation, which I don't know how many of you grew up Christianing like I did, but there's a common interpretation of this parable, and if you've been around the church for any length of time, you've probably heard some form of it. And the common interpretation we could synthesize as maybe being something like, be mindful of your view of God, because if you see God as being cruel, you may be afraid to take action with your life. This misperception of who God is causes us to isolate, freeze up, not take risks. It's a useful kind of as a morality tale in that way. But here's the thing that I noticed this week, these last few weeks. It's a morality tale that illustrates modern Western capitalist values really clearly. There's this like God can't drive a parked car thing, you know, go out there and do something with what he's given to you, which really sounds a lot like, you know, pull yourself up by your bootstraps and make something out of your life, you know, like, it's helpful to read it that way, I guess. It's kind of like a motivational cautionary tale, isn't it? Because if God's going to chuck you into the outer darkness based on whether or not you took what he'd given you to the bank or stuck it in a hole, then you better start figuring out where the bank is and what's required of you, and it can get you going. But the motor behind that is what? What's the motor behind that inspiration? It might get you up out of your seat and doing something, but why are you doing it? What's it? Yeah. Yeah, like I don't know what gnashing of teeth means, but I feel like I don't want to find out. I'd rather be in the inner light than the outer darkness, and so better get moving. Cautionary tale. It's not what the story's about. I think it's helpful and a useful way to interpret, and it can get you moving, and it can probably get you doing stuff for the church. We can get you plugged in right here, you know.
Is this? I feel like I need to reread it, but is this kind of like use what's been given to you for him kind of thing, like, and that's the investment.
Use what's been given
Like,
to you.
Waste your talent.
Don't waste your talents. Ha! Yes, thank you. All right. That's how I grew up hearing it. Totally. Talents, baby. You know, talents. We all got them. Talent, it's not a talent. The word talent doesn't mean talent, unfortunately.
No, I know it's not, but I think it could be interpreted like the gifts. Stop shaking your head. I think the things that the things God gave you that you're good at, or your gifts, I guess, could be used for his glory, and that's the investment that you're giving.
Yes. Yeah. I think that's a Phil need to intervene here before I'm kidding.
Don't worry, we do this all the time.
I think that is like true. Like who would disagree with that? You know, like no, you shouldn't use your innate goodness to help others.
The interpretation is right or wrong. I think
Right.
what I'm saying is valid. That if you're, whether it has to do with this or not.
Yes.
I understand. But you're saying I'm wrong. So what? Okay.
No, you're right. And I like who's going to argue with that interpretation? That's seems very healthy. Like put the stuff in you to use. You know, be the blessing that like play your role in this whole thing. You know, it takes all of us, and so be you and share. I think that's beautiful. I don't think it's what the story's about, but I do think it's beautiful. So talent is this ancient Greek word. It means a scale or a balance, not like a skill set. And it was approximately 80 pounds. When it was a unit of money, it was valued for that weight in silver. And so as a unit of currency, a talent was worth about 6,000 denarii. A denarii was a day's labor. And so a talent would be worth about 20 years of labor. So 10 talents, what the first servant received, was the equivalent of 200 years of work for the average person. This is like huge sums of money that we're talking about. This is like right, well, he only got the one, but still, he got one, so that's 20 years of labor. That was a big hole. Yeah, don't call him lazy. He's obviously not lazy. It's a deep hole you got to dig. He's a hardworking guy, just like the rest of us.
But anytime you compare yourself to someone else, you're always left feeling cruddy.
Yeah, or awesome.
Yes, but that's like not a good answer.
Neither of those are helpful. Yeah, so it's a huge sum of money. This is a story about like the super elites. You know, this is like the stories in the newspaper or whatever, the internet stuff. I don't know how are we do podcasts. I don't know. About like the billionaire bunkers and stuff. You know, the folks that are getting ready and they're going to avoid the apocalypse because they got enough money to do that, and everybody else goes, that's screwed up. This is like one of those kind of stories. It's illustrating this gap, this separation between normal society and those who have sort of made it big. So Jesus, as far as we can tell, he doesn't seem to be independently wealthy. He says things like, foxes have holes and birds have nests, and I got nowhere to sleep tonight. And he had gathered a large following of mixed group, a lot of people in his company, but his message was particularly resonant with other starving peasants. And so in first century Galilee, where all this is taking place, the predominant worldview among the poor was something called the limited good world. Limited good. And its basic idea, this guy named Richard Rohrbach, he says the basic tenet of the limited good worldview was that the whole pie had already been distributed, that all the good there is, all the means to make it through life had already been distributed, that it was all right here, and that there's no more that can be manufactured or made. And so that means that getting more meant somebody else was inherently getting less. And to have accumulated more than one started with, is to have taken the share that actually belonged to somebody else, because there's just exactly enough to go around. This is the worldview. Things are real interesting right now in the world, and I feel that most of us have at some point scratched our heads and been like, so the government can just print money now. Like, what is value? Like, what is the... All right, so I think conceptually, down at our core, most of us still function with this limited good worldview, where it doesn't seem like the resources are completely unlimited. But we've set up these systems and structures that can't really live in that same situation, right? Too big to fail. Print more money. It's kind of weird. So, if you're Jesus telling this story, or if you're a starving Galilean peasant listening to this story, you would immediately not look at the master as the God figure. It would be just another rich dude doing his thing. And it would be maybe even more intense in the way that we experience, not just like jealousy or anger or whatever, but that the greed is also connected in that culture to shame. It's just a shameful behavior, not admirable. But since we've grown up in an American Christian, I put that in parentheses, I think it's funny words to put next to each other, though I like America and Christianity for the most part. But we've grown up in this American Christian context, and we've had our minds shaped by capitalism. That's the lens, even depending on our awareness of it and separation from it. And I'm not here to rail against capitalism. I've been in debates with people about it before, and they're like, why don't you move to Russia? And I'm like, I don't want to. I like it here. I don't think the system's perfect. Our minds shaped by capitalism. And so it's easy to perceive that this parable is talking about values that have been ingrained in us through our culture, like hard work, intelligent investing, which is called stewardship in religious circles, self-improvement. But for Jesus and his listeners, this is just another story illustrating their predicament, which is that the rich get richer, and whatever little the poor have is lost almost as soon as it's acquired. And this is what was so surprising and wonderful about the last few weeks spending time with this story. Is as I was reading it, I thought, this can't be what it's actually about. I mean, it's how I always heard it. And like we've said, the lessons that people have pulled from that perspective, I think are true and helpful. But I was like, I don't think that's what the story's about. So I'm like, do you do this? You kind of come up, start seeing it a different way, and then you kind of second guess yourself, Like, oh, I'm not smart enough to have my own opinion, so I got to find somebody else smarter than me that said it before to make sure that I'm safe. Yeah, so I just started Googling around. You have to go like 19 pages deep in a Google search to find anybody who says anything other than the normal, the common way to interpret this. And to me, that just shows how deeply entrenched we are in this American capitalist paradigm, which again has, its benefits. Jesus went around teaching, preaching, and demonstrating the gospel. Gospel means good news. Come to the end of the story and say, what's the good news here? What's the good news? I get another. All right, let's just skip this next slide, Ben. Let's go to slide 10. So if Jesus and his listeners are going to be inherently skeptical of the behavior of the master and the whole structure of the system, I think it is important to take a look at the details that we have about what the master's like. We can figure out if this third servant is reliable or unreliable. So here's what we know about the master in this story. So this story appears in two other Gospels. We read Matthew's version. It's also in Luke's Gospel. And then it's also in this one called the Gospel of the Hebrews, which has been lost in the sands of time. But there's a reference to it by a guy named Eusebius in the 4th century, who also read the story and was like, this is messed up. There's no way that this and so he references this Gospel of the Hebrews. And the Gospel of the Hebrews is totally tangential, but in the Gospel of the Hebrews, the hero of the story is the middle guy who didn't work too hard and he also didn't work at all. The one that got the 10 talents, it said, blew all of his money on harlots and flute women. Flute women. I didn't have time to look into the Greek. Flute women. So he didn't do the right thing. But we do have Luke's account of the story, and it's mostly the same. There's a couple details that are different, and I think the different details are very interesting. And Luke's telling it's a nobleman who goes to a distant country to get royal power for himself. He's going to go get some more stuff, and then he's going to come back. And he gets slaves, and he says, here's some money, do business with this until I come back. And look at this little detail here, seems telling. But the citizens of his country hated him, and they sent a delegation after him saying, we don't want this man to rule over us. If you're trying to make it work in the old paradigm, then you kind of have to do some gymnastics here and be like, well, this story's about Jesus, and the Pharisees didn't like him. But I don't know, maybe. So he comes back from his trip, and he says to the bystanders, this is at the end of, he says, well done, and he gets the third guy that hid everything. And he says to the bystanders, there's an audience in this telling, he says, take the pounds from him and give it to the one. Or take the pound and give it to the one with 10 pounds. And the audience says, Lord, he already has 10 pounds. And then he says, to those who have, more will be given. From those who have nothing, even what they have will be taken away. And then how about this? As for these enemies of mine who didn't want me to be their king, bring them over here and slaughter them in my presence. WWJD. Measuring, grabbing for power, executing his enemies, casting into the outer darkness, somebody whose primary offense was being afraid of him. I was afraid of you, and so I didn't act. Kill him. I don't know. Is that what God's like? I'm not nearly brave enough to sit here on this little stool that can rotate so I can look at everyone and say that I know exactly what God is like, or that God is not vengeful and wrathful. I'm not brave enough to make that call. I don't sense that that's how reality works. And I for as weird as I am, I really just keep trusting the scriptures, I can't get away from them. They're this filter I run everything through, and I felt my whole life like it made me weird to the outside world, and then lately I feel like it makes me weird to the inside world. weird thing, man. Hey, opinions. But reading the story and seeing that the perspective of the master and what is God like seems to be critical to understanding what it is that we can do with this tale. I think if we just hold it against just a few other scriptures, and I think you could pick 100 beyond this, these are the ones that stood out to me. This is how Jesus and the New Testament writers describe God. And by describing God this way, they also describe the nature of reality. This is 1 John. He says, God is love. And so anyone who lives in love lives also in God, and God lives in them. And so what's love like? Well, love is patient. Love is kind. It's not proud. It doesn't dishonor others. It's not self-seeking. It's not easily angered. It keeps no record of wrongs. That's one I've really been trying to learn. John's gospel is what Jesus said. He said, as the Father's loved me, I've loved you the same way. You know what love is like. You've experienced it. It's remain in my love. Remain here. Stabilize in this place. Be transformed by the renewing of your mind. As our soul accepts and receives and understands grace and love and forgiveness and the okayness of all things. As we let go, learn, and it's a process, but as we learn to let go of our mind's proclivity to judge everything it sees, ourselves included, we begin to see that that's just a function of the mind. It's what it does. And we don't have to agree with it or go along with it. We can step back from it. And as we detach, disconnect, get some space from that judgment, the judging, and we experience this vast expansiveness surrounds our mind and our ideas and our opinions. And doesn't invalidate them or make them another problem to fix. It holds it all, this love, this grace. And Jesus says, you know this. You will come to know this. Even if it's only small glimpses many times. Settle in, stabilize, rest in this place of love. Your mind will catch on eventually. So the only, after I nearly sprained my finger and wore out my computer trying to find an interpretation that wasn't the normal one, I did discover that, have you ever heard of liberation theology? It's primarily the African-American churches. It's born from the African-American church. And it's sort of like the gospel of the oppressed. And the whole idea here is that, if you're in this is a funny little wrinkle I've noticed. And that's that sort of whatever subculture you find yourself a part of, whatever your group is, like we need a group to survive. Where it's sort of like, what do you call it? Primates. What is it? What is it? No, like a group. Pack. We travel in packs. There's a word for this. Anyway, we need a group, and so we find a group, and then we start to learn what the group's about, and then we start to agree with the group, and then the group tells us the stuff that we got to do to stay in the group, and then so we start doing the stuff the group says to stay in the group, and some of the groups are really helpful. Most of them are probably valuable in some way. And then we're so happy that we found a group that we start to think, like, I'm so glad I'm not alone or a part of that other group. As a judgment thing comes back through. And the funny thing is that I remember, do you remember that they called it the culture wars? Maybe they still do. Like, I grew up in the 80s and the early 90s as a homeschool kid, and I was aware of the culture wars. There was some group of people out there that were persecuting American Christians, and you're like, yeah, that's messed up. It's not right. They're taking away our rights and stuff. And then, you get out, you look around a little bit and you see, well, they feel the same way. They feel like the American Christians have been sort of subjugating their voice and value. And I remember somewhere in middle school, I thought, wait, everybody thinks they're the underdog. you know? Right? Like you're rooting for the Rangers to win because they're the underdog, but then everybody that roots for the Houston Astros is like, everybody hates us. Let's stick it to them. You guys got to find some like motivation for your group to exist and crush. And this liberation theology puts the whole thing on its head and says, like the biblical text is written it's the voice of the oppressed. It isn't the voice of the empire. And when we put on that lens for a minute, and we take a look at this story, the third servant begins to inhabit the role of the hero. He's this whistleblower. And what he's done is unmasked the joy of his master. He unmasks it for what it is, which is the profits of exploitation, squandered and wasteful excess. It's this function to get more, double it, acquire, hold it, keep it. And the third servant is punished for speaking the truth. And so the issue, what ruffles the feathers of the master in this lens isn't that his profits weren't doubled. It was that the truth is now being spoken in a public setting. And the emperor has no clothes. The third servant says, I knew that you were a harsh man. You were reaping where you didn't sow. You were gathering where you hadn't scattered seeds. That Greek word for harsh is skleros, and it's the Pharaoh. Remember how the Pharaoh had a hard heart and he couldn't change because of that? It's the same idea here. And it's interesting that the master doesn't even bother to refute the claim. He just continues to intimidate. He's like, you knew that about me, did you? And the third servant has unmasked the master's wealth for what it is, which is derived entirely from the toil of others and hoarded up, and he is unwilling to participate with the exploitation. He takes the master's wealth out of circulation, and he confronts him when the time comes. And it's an incredible act of resistance, nonviolent resistance. Every time we encounter throughout history nonviolent resistance, is both its effect and its cost is shocking. And so the servant, takes the money out of circulation, and he knows the day's coming when he's going to have to talk to the master about it, and he's probably getting his words right. And one thing that he says that I think is incredibly important is that he admits that through the entire process he was afraid. That hung me up for a while when I was trying to understand this thing. I thought, well, if he's the hero, then why is he afraid? Being afraid doesn't really seem like a good quality to have as a hero, nor does it seem like maybe the function of the kingdom. I'm trying to figure out what's the good news here. Well, maybe I got this thing wrong if he's afraid. And then I just started to look at my own life and the life of almost everybody that I admire, whose story I've heard. And you just start to realize that, this process towards freedom, salvation, healing, wholeness, union, when it begins with us and when the call to it becomes stronger or louder than we can just ignore and continue to just participate in life as it is, when it becomes less and less possible to turn a blind eye to the things that we've seen, when we've seen enough that we can't unsee, that the easy answers don't work anymore. And we find that we're in a position that seems untenable and that it's time to move. But it's impossible to tell what comes next. I have to leave here, but where am I going? That experience of being stuck between the stations? Right? I remember hearing the story somebody used to tell all the time about when they were trying to colonize the new world here. And nobody would make it. There's snakes and malaria and tribes that don't want you here. And people take their boats over here from Spain and then sail them right back home. The going was too tough. And so one of these nuts, I forget which one, De Soto or somebody we all have heard of, burned the ships. They got here and it burned the ships. We're staying. Because there's such a fear of being in those in-between spaces, those liminal places where we know we can't go back to what was, but we have no idea where we're even going or how to get there or what it's going to be like. And what's the old saying? Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's, what is it? Being afraid and doing it anyways. Yeah, fear is this unavoidable aspect of becoming free. It's the stopgap. It's the last desperate attempt of ignorance and darkness and evil to push us back into our little caged roles. And the story begins to look a lot like the Passion narrative to me, where it's like the one who seems to have power, the one who seems unafraid would be the master. He decides what he's going to do is take this third slave and make an example out of him. And so in front of the whole crowd, he says, cast him into the outer darkness. And there's kind of this implication that he's like, I'm going to teach you how the real world works, kid. Those who have, more will be given. Those who have not, even what they have will be taken away. And the slave is thrown into the outer darkness, and there's weeping and gnashing of teeth. And it feels to me like this is a description of hell. You know, that's sort of the normal way to look at it, and I think it's probably right, but it feels to me more like it's a description of hell on earth. And it's the kind of hell on earth that is experienced daily by anyone who isn't accepted and validated by the dominant culture. And it's also the kind of hell that's experienced for anyone who's begun to awaken to the cages that we've been placed in and has begun to do the courageous internal work of becoming free. You know, it would be really nice if this process of salvation, this process of awakening, this process of being saved, made whole, you know, if the recognition event was followed by just a parade of awesomeness, we have this very strong desire, and even a lot of theology sort of developed to back it up, that says, like, Jesus did it all. It's all taken care of. Suffering, all of it went to the cross. We get to live in freedom. And it's like we want to skip the cross and go straight to resurrection, and Jesus never gives us that option. To become whole and free and made new, the process is through the cross. It's through the suffering. He said, take up your cross daily and follow after me. All right, let's see here. Yeah, I wonder, how do you respond to that? What do you do with suffering? Here's the process as I experience it and see it to be. How do you feel? Yeah. Oh, well, that's lovely. So you're saying that maybe the other two servants in this story were just already free, right? And so they're just like, all right, you got some money, I'm gonna make some money for you. That's fine. Yeah. 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 Yeah, that's beautiful. Maybe the suffering is actually what this guy needed to discover who it is that he's meant to be. So maybe it is the ultimate gift. Wow. Wow. There's purpose in the pain. Yeah. I heard One more time.
Suffering is your feeling of being in control, and it's an invitation to get out of control and put your reliance in God instead of yourself.
Yeah. Yeah, I heard Richard Rohr, he defines suffering as anytime we feel like we're not in control. Richard Rohr.
I always say that
Suffering is the resistance to reality. Mm. Yeah, wow. Thank you.
Listening to all these different interpretations, aren't parables stories, and we're all in our own stories, so we relate to each character where we are, and sometimes we live each character's part, and it's a mystery.
Yeah. Yes.
I'm not smart enough to go to this church.
That is not true. None of us are. Okay, so the context. Thank you. Real quick, the context of this story, the verses that precede Jesus telling this story, is he says this. This is Matthew 24. I think there's a slide. Oh, I didn't make a slide for it. He goes. It's hard to find a beautiful image to pair with these words. They will hand you over to be tortured, and they will put you to death, and you will be hated by all nations because of my name. All right, the gospel to his followers. And then he tells the story about somebody being hated and tortured, and it doesn't seem that Jesus would be on the giving end of that. And straight out of this story, okay, straight out of Matthew 24, and again, I'm recognizing that months ago, this is why I steered far clear of the story, is because the one that comes right after it is probably the most aggressive words in the entire New Testament, I think probably the most sort of like, yikes, in the whole book. And it's this famous parable. It's about it's this like final judgment situation. There's the sheep and the goats. You guys know that one? And what happens in that parable is that it says, in the end days, the Son of Man will come and he'll judge. He'll judge and separate the sheep from the goats, and the sheep will be brought into eternal reward, and the goats will be brought into eternal punishment. You guys here's a little Sunday school quiz for you. Do you happen to remember what the criteria was for either being rewarded or punished for eternity? What was it that was required? You had to know, yes. You had to know God. You didn't know me. And there's people that are like, hey, look at all this stuff I did for you. And he's like, yeah, but, were we there? Like, all right, so the criteria for this was caring for the poor. That's what separates the sheep and the goats. And for the sheep, this is what Jesus says. He says, I think I do have a slide for this one. Maybe? I can't remember. Come, you who are blessed by my Father, take your inheritance, the kingdom prepared for you since the creation of the world. For I was hungry, and you gave me something to eat. I was thirsty, and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger. You invited me in. I needed clothes, and you clothed me. I was sick, and you looked after me. I was in prison, and you came to see me. And the righteous will answer, Lord, when did we see you hungry and feed you, or thirsty and give you something to drink? When did we see you as a stranger and invite you in, or needing clothes and clothe you? And the king will reply, truly I tell you, whatever you did for the least one of these brothers or sisters of mine, you've done it unto me, for me. And I feel the pairing of these stories, right, one next to the other. The implication there is that the invitation of Christ, the invitation to freedom, the invitation to salvation, wholeness, union, will necessarily cost us everything. It will put us at odds against will experience what it is to feel at odds against nearly every system you can conceive of. Religious systems, government systems, I don't know, your boss, your family. Nobody likes change, first of all. And Jesus says you can assume that the deeper we follow into this pursuit, the more of ourselves that we surrender and give away, the more freedom we begin to not just long for, but know that process is going to take us outside of the city gates, beyond the walls, into this no man's land where resurrection occurs. And I feel like he's just trying to remind us, like, look, the systems can't take care of you. They're not built for this life. And so you're going to have to take care of each other. He begins his most famous sermon, the Sermon on the Mount, with his words. He says, you are the salt of the earth. You are the light of the world. It's present tense. He says, you're already blessed. The Sermon on the Mount begins at wholeness. It's hidden wholeness. It describes that everyone is actually already blessed. And maybe especially the ones that have been rejected by society. And this is, I'll conclude, this is my sort of like takeaway from this whole thing, is this. Not everybody's going to resonate with this, I realize, but I'm just going to share from my life experience, and it's that it took me a really long time, and maybe I'm not there yet, to just try to understand like what it is that I'm here for. You ever feel like that? And I spent a lot of my life feeling sort of unqualified for almost everything except for like having fun. And I kind of felt like I had like a whatever the before life, whatever it is that happens before you come into this thing, like the used car lot. I got like a jalopy, I'm like, this thing is like, why doesn't it work? And it's not a very happy feeling. You can stall out in that for a long time. But something I suppose that we could say might be the upside of feeling like you can't pass muster. What's the cut muster? What's the word? In society. Like you don't have it all together, and now you're too tired to pretend anymore like you do. Is that from that position of sort of inadequacy, which again can be crippling, but maybe the advantage of not being able to fit into society's norms is that as we begin to wake up and look around, we start to see just how insane society's norms are. And that the process of coming to that recognition necessarily goes through periods where you have to wonder if you're insane. It's a strange road to sanity, I think. It's acknowledging the insanity. And if God isn't something that we need to get or to understand or to have or to explain or to give away, if God is reality and the nature of reality is love, then there's no more acquisition that's necessary. What actually has to happen is we have to start shedding, we have to see layers to come off, this process of letting go. And so maybe it's an advantage to feel like we don't know where we fit, because depending on how we work with it, all of us need to pass through this period, this experience, this season of personal, emotional, spiritual bankruptcy. One of Jesus' most repeated phrases, this is what he said. He said, whoever clings to their life exactly how it is destroys that very life. But if you let it go, then you'll have it forever. Real, everlasting. Corey, if you want to come up. I'm going to end with this. So we'll have we have 20 minutes here, which is nice. And so Corey and Don and Misty are going to play some tunes, and everyone, it's just sort of like you're now free to move about the cabin. You can use this time in whatever way feels like it would be most helpful to you. You can relax. You can sing along. You can take a nap. You can come in closer, be closer to the music. It's unplugged here this morning. The communion table is open. If that's a helpful way to respond, you can pray with the person sitting next to you if you got something that would be helpful to say out loud. But in thinking about this story, I was reminded of this thing I read a long time ago. It's Richard Rohr again. And this is what he has to say about freedom. He says, you're only free when you have nothing to protect and nothing that you need to prove or defend. Trapped people have to do what they think they want to do. Free people want to do what they know they have to do. So I'll just leave that with us and invite everyone to respond in whichever way feels most helpful for you. So thank you for being here. I'll come up and dismiss us at 11:30, but make yourself at home.